Welcome to Life Stories, where we share powerful, real-life experiences that teach us profound lessons. Today, we bring you the story of a woman who faced years of judgment and cruelty from her husband's family, only to have her life turned upside down in one fateful moment. Betrayal, deception, and family secrets come to light in a shocking turn of events. Join us as we dive into a journey of resilience, love, and the undeniable truth that always finds its way to the surface. Subscribe to our channel now to start today's story. I never thought a happy party could turn into chaos. The room had been filled with laughter, music, and the sound of glasses clinking, creating an atmosphere of warmth and togetherness. It felt like one of those moments in life where everything is perfectly in place. Like the world had slowed down just enough for me to appreciate its beauty. But then, as if on cue, everything changed in an instant. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and I had arrived at Patricia Williams's home, the mansion on the outskirts of the city. Patricia, my mother-in-law, was the kind of woman who could make an entire room fall silent with just a glance. Elegant, composed, and always in control, she had a way of making people feel like they didn't quite measure up, no matter how hard they tried. I had been married to her son, Mark, for 13 years, and in all that time, I had never quite earned her approval. To Patricia, I wasn't good enough, not because I wasn't educated or capable, but because I was a librarian. To her, working in a small, quiet library was beneath the Williams name. I often wondered if it would have made a difference if I were a high-powered lawyer or a businesswoman like her. But it didn't matter. She had made up her mind long ago that I wasn't the right match for Mark, and she extended the same cold indifference to our daughter, Emma. I couldn't remember a time when Patricia had been warm toward Emma. Emma, who was now 12 years old, had always been treated as if she were invisible in her grandmother's eyes. Like she was a reminder of something Patricia wished would just go away. I parked the car in front of the grand estate, a Victorian mansion that looked as though it had stepped right out of a history book. It stood tall, imposing against the afternoon sky, its black iron gates gleaming in the sunlight. I couldn't help but feel small in front of it, the house a symbol of everything Patricia held dear: wealth, power, and control. But I wasn't going to let that affect me today. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my composure as I stepped out of the car. Emma was already waiting for me at the school gate, her face lighting up as soon as she saw me. It was one of those moments that always made my heart swell. She was my little girl, my joy in this world, and I knew no matter what happened with Patricia, I would always have Emma. But today, she seemed nervous. I could tell she didn't want to go to her grandmother's house. But I could also see the resolve in her eyes. She was always so brave, so strong, even when she didn't have to be. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. Her brown hair was tied in a ponytail, and she had that innocent look on her face that made it all the more difficult to lie to her. "Nothing, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile, though my stomach was already tightening. "We just have to make a quick stop before going home. It's your grandmother's house, remember?" Emma's face immediately fell. She didn't respond, but I could see her hands gripping her backpack straps, her knuckles turning white. She hated going to that house, and I didn't blame her. Patricia had never been kind to her, and as much as I tried to protect her from it, I knew Emma could feel the coldness radiating from her grandmother. I wished I could make things easier for her, but there was nothing I could do. The drive to Patricia's mansion was quiet, the tension between us palpable. When we arrived, I noticed that there was already a sleek black car parked outside, the unmistakable sign that my sister-in-law, Jessica, had arrived. Jessica was Patricia's younger daughter, and like her mother, she carried herself with an air of superiority. She worked in luxury real estate, flaunting her expensive brands and constantly talking about her latest investments. I had never felt comfortable around her, and I knew Emma felt the same way. As we stepped out of the car, Emma looked up at me. "Aunt Jessica is here too," she muttered, her voice lacking any enthusiasm. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Let's just get this over with," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. We walked up to the massive front door, which swung open before I even had a chance to knock. There stood Jessica, arms crossed, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly salary. Her smile was all teeth, her voice dripping with amusement. Well, she said, finally, you're here. Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming than I remembered. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the formal living room. The furniture looked too expensive to touch, and the whole place had an air of cold perfection. Everything was immaculate, every piece in its place. It was as if the Williams family had designed their entire lives to be flawless, and yet, beneath that polished exterior, there was a darkness I couldn't ignore. Patricia sat in the center of the room, her posture perfect, her expression as commanding as ever. Next to her sat Ryan Collins, Jessica's fiancé. He was a well-known corporate lawyer, someone who seemed more composed than his fiancée but whose eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Nice of you to join us, Patricia said, her voice sharp and clipped. She didn't even look at me when she spoke, and I could feel her eyes scan me with disdain, as if she was inspecting some piece of art she didn't quite like. As I stood there, trying to hold my composure, I felt the familiar sting of being an outsider in my own family. It was the same feeling I had been carrying for years, the weight of never quite belonging. But I had Mark, and I had Emma, and that was enough. Patricia's voice cut through my thoughts. This, she said, reaching for a small velvet box on the coffee table, is the Williams family heirloom, a bracelet that has been passed down for generations. She opened the box with deliberate slowness, and I felt my breath catch. Inside, nestled in the velvet, was a stunning diamond and sapphire bracelet, its stones sparkling under the chandelier's glow. It was breathtaking, but more than that, it was worth a fortune. This bracelet, Patricia continued smoothly, is valued at $200. Jessica leaned forward, a smug smile on her face. I'll be wearing it at my wedding, she declared, her voice laced with arrogance. I could feel Emma stiffen beside me. Patricia's eyes flickered toward her, then back to me. Make sure your daughter understands that this bracelet is not something to be touched, she said, her tone cold. The implication was clear. Emma wasn't worthy to be near something so valuable. Anger bubbled inside me, but I swallowed it down. I had to protect Emma, no matter what. I squeezed her hand tightly. She would never touch something that isn't hers, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the rage boiling beneath the surface. Patricia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she dismissed us with a simple wave of her hand. You'll be at the church tomorrow, she said. Try not to be late. As Emma and I left the mansion, I exhaled deeply. I could feel the tension still gnawing at my chest. But I held on to one simple truth. No matter how Patricia treated us, we would always have each other. But I had no idea that the events to come would test that bond in ways I couldn't even imagine. The next day, I tried to push aside the nagging unease that had been clinging to me since our visit to Patricia's mansion. Mark and I had promised Emma that we would try to make the wedding enjoyable for her. She had been excited at first, talking about the flowers and the music, but I could see the apprehension in her eyes. She wasn't looking forward to spending hours in a place where she felt like an outsider. And honestly, neither was I, but we had no choice. It was family, and despite everything, we still showed up. The church was stunning, an old cathedral with stained glass windows that let in the softest light. It looked like a picture out of a storybook. But beneath that beauty, something felt off. There was tension in the air, and I could sense that today was going to be different. Mark was unusually quiet, and as we took our seats, I could see that his fingers were laced together, as if bracing himself for whatever was about to unfold. Emma stood beside me in her pale pink dress, looking like a little angel. But I knew better. She was nervous. She wasn't going to say it aloud, but I could feel the tension in her body, the way her small hand was gripping mine, as if she was afraid of what might happen. I gave her a reassuring smile, though I was unsure if I believed it myself. Mom, she whispered, looking up at me, everything will go well today, right? I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Of course, sweetheart, it'll be a beautiful ceremony. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew that this wedding would be anything but beautiful. And as if to confirm my worst fears, the moment the ceremony started, a loud, shrill scream echoed through the church. My bracelet is gone. The scream came from none other than Jessica. The entire church went silent in an instant, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. It was a strange moment, one where time seemed to stop. Guests turned their heads, and even the priest at the altar faltered. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes darting nervously toward the door. Within seconds, Patricia, Jessica, and several other guests rushed to the preparation room. And of course, Mark, Emma, and I followed right behind them. As we entered the room, I saw Jessica standing in front of a vanity mirror, her face twisted in panic. Her hands were shaking, and she was staring at the empty spot on the table where the bracelet had once been. My diamond bracelet, she gasped, her voice filled with frantic terror. Someone stole it. Everyone gathered around her, and I could feel the eyes of the guests on us. The room was charged with a strange kind of energy, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. And then, like a thunderclap, Jessica's eyes locked onto Emma. That child, she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. She stole my bracelet. I felt Emma stiffen beside me. Her eyes widened in shock. No, I didn't, she cried, shaking her head vehemently. I didn't take anything. But Jessica wasn't listening. I saw her come into the room earlier. She insisted, pointing her trembling finger toward Emma. She took it. That girl stole my bracelet. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The whispers were harsh and accusing. A librarian's daughter, of course. Someone muttered, that's why she was here. I could feel the anger rising in me. I knew Emma. I knew my daughter. And she would never steal anything from anyone. And yet, despite our protests, the room was already turning against her. Patricia stepped forward, her face cold and unyielding. Mia, she said, her voice laced with venom. Is this true? I felt my heart break as I pulled Emma closer to me, instinctively protecting her. Emma was shaking, tears welling in her eyes. I swear I didn't take it, she cried, her voice breaking. But the damage had already been done. The room was already starting to turn its back on us. And it wasn't just the guests. Even the way Patricia looked at Emma, the disdain in her eyes, was like a dagger to my heart. She wasn't just accusing my daughter of theft. She was confirming everything she had ever believed about us. That we didn't belong. That we were nothing more than a stain on her perfect family. And then, as I tried to reassure Emma, it happened. Before anyone could stop her, Jessica swung a porcelain vase off the vanity and hurled it at Emma's head. The vase shattered on impact, and Emma cried out in pain as she collapsed to the floor. Blood trickled down her forehead, and I could feel my heart stop. It was as if the world had paused, leaving only the sound of Emma's whimpering cries and the sharp intake of breath from the stunned crowd. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I cradled Emma's face. Baby, it's okay, I whispered, my voice trembling. I've got you. But the room was frozen in shock. Jessica's face twisted in fury, her breath heavy. But before she could open her mouth to say anything more, Mark stepped in front of her, his voice booming with fury. Are you out of your mind? He shouted, his face twisted in rage. You just hit a child. I could feel the rage boiling inside me. But there was no time for that. Mark was already calling the police, demanding that someone take action. But all I could focus on was Emma. My baby girl was hurt, and no one had stepped in to stop it. The sirens wailed in the distance, and I held Emma tightly in my arms, her blood staining my hands. This wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was the moment everything changed. And little did I know, the truth was about to come to light in the most unexpected of ways. The chaos in the church seemed to stretch on forever. The sound of sirens outside was deafening, but it did little to drown out the suffocating tension in the room. I was still holding Emma in my arms, her small body trembling as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Her face was pale, the blood from the cut on her forehead trickling slowly, but it was the look of fear in her eyes that haunted me. Mark stood beside me, his face a mask of fury as he spoke to the police officers, giving them the details of what had happened. The guests who had witnessed the incident were too shocked to speak, their eyes wide, some murmuring in disbelief, others staring at Jessica with a mixture of disgust and confusion. But Jessica didn't seem to notice. Her posture was rigid, her eyes darting around nervously. But she was no longer the poised woman who had entered the room only moments before. She was unraveling. "Someone call the police," Mark thundered again, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. His words broke the stillness in the room. And within moments, 2 officers arrived, their presence causing the crowd to step back. The taller officer, a man named Detective Harris, stepped forward and addressed Jessica, his voice firm and unyielding. "Miss Jessica Williams," he said, his tone cold, "you are under arrest for assaulting a minor, filing a false police report, and attempting to commit insurance fraud." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I could feel the shock ripple through the room. But it wasn't just the guests who were stunned. Even Patricia, who had always held the power in this family, was standing there, wide-eyed, her face drained of color. I glanced over at her. And for the first time in 13 years, I saw something I hadn't thought possible: fear. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her face twisted in disbelief, her expression a mix of horror and outrage. "No, this isn't what it looks like," she protested, her voice rising in panic. But it was too late. The evidence was already piling up against her. Just as the officers moved toward Jessica to place her under arrest, a new voice cut through the tension. Ryan, Jessica's fiancé, who had been a silent observer up until this point, stepped forward. His expression was one of disgust, his eyes dark with anger. "Stop lying, Jessica," Ryan said coldly. "We both know what really happened." The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to Ryan as he pulled out his phone and held it up for everyone to see. "I wasn't going to say anything," Ryan continued, his voice unwavering. "But after what just happened, I have no choice. You need to face the truth." With a few taps on his screen, the video began to play. It was a security footage recording from the bridal preparation room. The camera showed Jessica standing nervously by the vanity mirror, looking over her shoulder. Then, with quick, deliberate movements, she reached for the diamond bracelet and slipped it into her designer handbag. The video didn't lie. Gasps echoed through the room as the footage played. Jessica's face contorted with shock, her mouth opening and closing. But no words came out. She was caught. Ryan continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "She staged the whole thing," he said, his voice laced with disgust. "She knew she couldn't afford her condo payments, so she decided to fake the theft and claim the insurance money." It was as if the room had exploded. Whispers filled the air, some of the guests looking at Jessica with disbelief, others turning to Patricia for an explanation. But Patricia remained silent, her gaze fixed on her daughter. You lied?" Patricia's voice trembled, the words barely escaping her lips. Jessica looked up at her mother, her face a twisted mask of desperation. "No, I didn't, Ryan. You don't understand." But Ryan wasn't listening. "It's over, Jessica," he said, his voice final. "You've been caught. The whole thing. Stealing your own bracelet. The fake scream. It was all part of your plan to get money." I could feel the anger surging within me. The rage I had held back for so long finally spilling out. "You framed my daughter," I snarled at Jessica, stepping forward. "You hit my daughter. And now you want us to believe more of your lies?" Jessica's face was a picture of fury and denial. She stepped backward, her hands shaking. But before she could respond, the officers stepped forward to arrest her. "This is it, Jessica," Detective Harris said. "You're under arrest for assault and fraud." The room fell silent again as the officers handcuffed Jessica, her body stiff with resistance. She was led out of the room, her screams of protest echoing down the cathedral's hallways. But this time, no one came to her aid. The guests, once eager to be part of the Williams family's elite circle, now watched with a mixture of disbelief and silent judgment. As the officers took Jessica away, I turned to Mark, who was standing beside me, his face hard. We both knew this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. And just as I thought we had reached the end of this shocking turn of events, the final blow came. Margaret Lancaster, A voice boomed through the room. And all eyes turned to Patricia, who was standing there, frozen. The next few minutes seemed to stretch on forever as the officers revealed that Patricia herself was under investigation. There were whispers in the room, gasps of disbelief, as the full extent of the Williams family's corruption started to unravel. Patricia, the woman who had controlled this family with an iron fist for so many years, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. And as I looked at her, I realized that in the end, no one, not even the Williams name, could protect her anymore. As the chaos subsided and the police took Patricia away in handcuffs, I stood there, holding Emma tightly. My daughter, once a frightened little girl caught in the web of a toxic family, was now stronger, more resilient. For the first time in years, I saw the light of freedom in her eyes. Mark, too, was different. He had always been the passive one, the one who tried to keep the peace. But today he had stood up for us, for the family we had built. His love for Emma and me had always been there, but it was in that moment, as we faced the collapse of his family's empire, that I realized how much stronger we were when we stood together. The rest of the day felt like a blur. The scandal broke out in every news outlet, and soon, the once mighty Williams name was synonymous with corruption and deceit. People who had once adored Patricia and Jessica now distanced themselves. As for Emma and me, we were free, free from the judgment, free from the lies, free from a family that had never truly cared for us. Life slowly returned to normal. Emma went back to school, smiling more, laughing more, her spirit unbroken. Mark spent more time with us, focusing on what truly mattered. And me? I returned to my beloved library, the place where I felt truly at home. Months passed, but the scars of the past remained, albeit faded. And one afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the library, Emma stood before a group of children, her face beaming with pride. She had asked to do the storytelling that day, and as she read aloud, I couldn't help but smile. The truth always comes out, she began, her voice steady, her courage inspiring, and I realized then that no matter what life threw at us, the truth had always been our anchor. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more life-changing tales and lessons learned. Thank you for being part of our journey.